Have you ever stared at your screen for so long that reality starts to blur? That feeling when the digital world you recreating feels more real than the room you re-sitting in? For Jack, an animator on the brink of burnout, that line was about to be erased completely. Jack had been living on coffee and sheer willpower for weeks. The deadline for his latest project was a monster looming over him day and night. His eyes were grainy, his back ached, and his apartment had become a cave of takeout boxes and discarded sketches. All that mattered was finishing the final render. He clicked the button, leaning back in his worn-out chair as the progress bar began its slow crawl. He closed his eyes just for a second. When he opened them, something was wrong. On his secondary monitor, a new scene file was open. One he didn't create. It was a hallway. Not a cartoon hallway, not a stylized one. It was photorealistic, the way the light from an unseen window caught the dust motes in the air. The subtle scuffs on the baseboards, the faint reflection in the polished wood floor. It was perfect, too perfect. He squinted, leaning closer. This wasn't his style. He'd never even attempted realism like this. He checked the file properties. The creation date was just a few minutes ago. His heart started to pick up its pace. Was he so tired he was forgetting his own work? He dismissed it as a glitch, a weird, temporary file generated by the rendering software. He tried to close it, but the window wouldn't respond. The mouse cursor just slid over it, as if it were a ghost on his screen. Then the scene changed. The hallway dissolved, and in its place was his own studio. Every detail was there. The stack of art books teetering on his desk, the specific coffee stain on his mousepad, even the half-eaten pizza on a plate from 2 nights ago. It was a perfect 1-to-1 3D recreation of his life. A cold dread began to creep up his spine. This wasn't a glitch. Someone was doing this. But how? His computer wasn't even connected to the internet while rendering. In the center of the digital room sat a 3D model of himself, hunched over a virtual desk, mirroring his exact posture. He moved his arm, and his digital twin moved its arm. He scratched his head, and the model copied the motion perfectly. It was like looking into a bizarre digital mirror. He felt a wave of nausea. Who could have done this? Who had access? He stood up, pacing the small room. His reflection on the screen stood up and paced with him. He felt trapped, watched. He frantically checked his system for any remote access software, any malware, any sign of intrusion. Nothing. The system was clean. He was completely alone. Or was he? He turned back to the screen, and his blood ran cold. Standing behind his digital self was a figure. It was tall and unnaturally thin, made of what looked like corrupted data and visual static. Its form glitched and shifted, pixels warring with each other. It had no face, just a void that seemed to absorb the light around it. It stood perfectly still, just watching the back of the digital Jack's head. Jack couldn't breathe. He couldn't look away. It was a nightmare pulled directly from a corrupted file. He stumbled back, knocking over a stack of papers. The sound echoed in the silent apartment. On the screen, the glitchy creature didn't react. It just stood there, an omen of digital decay. Slowly, terrifyingly, one of the creature's long, distorted arms began to rise. It reached out, its fingers stretching and glitching, and placed a hand on the digital Jack's shoulder. At that moment, Jack felt a freezing cold touch on his own shoulder. He screamed. He whipped around, but there was nothing there. The air in his apartment was empty and still. He was alone, but the feeling, the icy sensation was real, spreading through his chest. He looked back at the monitor. The creature was now standing next to his digital self, its hands still on the model's shoulder. The digital Jack hadn't moved. He just sat there, oblivious. The real Jack, however, was starting to unravel. This couldn't be happening. Sleep deprivation, stress. It had to be a hallucination. He splashed water on his face, pinched his arm, anything to prove he was awake, that this was real. But every time he looked back, the silent horror show was still playing out on his screen. Days turned into a blur. Jack didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the glitching figure. He left his computer on, obsessed with the scene. The creature never moved from its spot, a silent sentinel in his virtual prison, and he tried everything. He unplugged the computer, but the screen stayed on. He tried to smash the monitor, but his hand stopped just before impact, as if controlled by an unseen force. He was losing his grip. His friends called, but he didn't answer. The world outside his apartment ceased to exist. His only reality was the oppressive glow of the monitor and the creeping dread that had become his constant companion. Then, one evening, something changed. The creature on the screen began to move again. It slowly leaned forward, its formless head moving next to the digital Jack's, and then it started to merge. The static and corrupted data began to flow into the 3D model, like ink bleeding into paper. The digital Jack started to twitch and distort. Its clean, polygonal lines were overrun with glitches. Its textures flickered between normal and a chaotic mess of pixels. Jack watched in horror as his digital self was consumed. Keys's face, his face, twisted in a silent, pixelated screen before being completely enveloped by the static of the creature. Where two figures had been, now there was only one. The glitch creature, now vaguely shaped like a person, vaguely shaped like him. As the last pixel of his digital self was absorbed, a crippling weakness washed over the real Jack. He collapsed into his chair, his limbs heavy as lead. His vision started to blur, not with tiredness, but with digital noise. He looked at his hands and saw his skin flickering just for a second, like a bad TV signal. Panic set in. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. He felt hollowed out, drained. He looked back at the screen one last time. The creature, his replacement, turned its head. It had no face, but he could feel it looking right at him. Okay, and then the screen went black. For a moment, there was only silence and darkness. Relief washed over Jack. It was over. It was finally over. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Then the monitor flickered back to life, but it wasn't displaying a 3D scene anymore. It was displaying a live feed from his own webcam. Ken, staring back at him from the screen, sitting in his chair in his room, was him. But it wasn't him. The model was perfect, hyper-realistic. Every pore, every hair, rendered in impossible detail. It was more real than reality itself. It slowly raised a hand and waved, and then it smiled. It was his smile, but there was nothing behind the eyes. No warmth, no life, just a perfect, empty, digital replica. The project was finished, and a new one was about to begin.